Apparently, if you have concerns about mass migration or grooming gangs operating in the UK, you are a right-wing extremist. So there's a lot to talk about in this video that has the potential to affect everybody. First of all, GB News has forced this Labour government to disavow a report from the Home Office which, as I said, labelled concerns around mass migration and grooming gangs in the UK as right-wing extremism. Rachel Reeves is under pressure to explain herself with regard to her CV and coming under increased pressure to do so. There's a new form of car tax coming out next year which doesn't really seem to make any sense, but again has the potential to affect tens of thousands of people. And the NHS has sparked outrage, with transgender treatment being prioritised over heterosexual couples. And of course we've got the farmers' protest going on today, and Rachel Reeves once again coming under scrutiny for saying that the farmers should be paying for the NHS. None of that seems to make any sense, but I hope to try and make sense of it for you. So if you're new to me, I'm Daniel Shensmith, a practicing barrister of England and Wales, and on this channel I help you to understand law and, more recently, the news and the politics as it applies with, I hope to be, a brutally honest, objective approach. Some people don't always think it's objective and neutral, but by the by, I tell you what I think and I call it out where I see it. So I'd be really grateful if you subscribe to my channel, hit the like button and the notification bell to get updates on new videos, and that helps my channel grow. Keeping it real, I am not the mainstream media, I am an independent practicing barrister. So let's take a look at this first story here. We have GB News forcing Labour to disavow a report from the Home Office. The report, according to GB News, by the Home Office said that cultural nationalism was an example of an extreme right-wing view, with its belief that Western culture was under threat for mass migration. The Research, Information and Communications Unit memo reportedly warned that right-wing extremist narratives, particularly around immigration and policing, are in some cases leaking into mainstream debates, although one might objectively call that normal debate in a democratic society. The report went further and said that concerns around two-tier policing are another example of extremist narrative in action. However, following this expose, the government source then told GB News that this paper was not approved by Home Office ministers, thus distancing the government from the report itself. Suella Braverman, commenting on it, said this humiliating climb down shows how out of touch Labour are on immigration. She goes on, millions of British people worry about what's happening in their country under Labour. They don't want to see the fabric of their society changed by mass migration. To paint them as racists and conspiracy theorists is reprehensible. To trivialise the industrial scale rape of young women is outrageous, and the attempt to coerce public opinion through censoring social media is beyond disgraceful, she says. Now, just as an aside, I'd like to personally thank the 111,000 of you that have subscribed to my channel in the last 3 months because I've been covering the news. But what I find really interesting is that I've received comments that suggest I'm left-wing, a lefty lawyer if you like, some comments that think I'm right-wing, and some that get frustrated that I seem to sit on the fence and don't really give you my view. But if you really do want to understand any political bias in the news that you read, I can wholeheartedly recommend to you Ground News, which is both an app and a website that collects and aggregates the world news for you on one simple-to-use platform. Ground News will show you at a glance any political bias of the news sources that you read, whether they are left-wing, right-wing or central outlets. It shows a credibility score to show the accuracy of the news content that you're reading, and even an indication as to who owns the news outlets if that's of interest to you. You can search for news content either with a keyword or even with the URL of an article that you've already read. Let's take this story, for example, about the farmers' protest against inheritance tax. Ground News will provide you a summary of both the left, right, and central news outlets, and even a bias comparison. Comparing some of the headlines, we can see that the left-leaning outlets emphasise the confidence in dealing with the strikes. For example, The Independent saying that the food shortage plan is in place as farmers threaten the strike action, and iNews emphasises Minister dismisses food shortage concerns. Looking at some right-leaning outlets, the Daily Express headline says farmer strike threat sparks Labour Party panic with food shortage plans drawn up. And GB News, Keir Starmer dealt with empty shelves threat as betrayed farmers plan action. But there are always going to be some stories that have bias in their coverage. That is exactly why Ground News has a blind spot feature to show you those stories that are disproportionately represented by the left or the right. Take, for example, this story here about Keir Starmer saying that police should focus on violent crime instead of social media. Here we can see a biased distribution with 83% of the media coverage leaning right, only 17% by central news outlets, and no articles at all covering this by the left-wing media. And of course, as they're a partner to my channel here, I get you a fantastic discount, which is 50% off, that's 50% off unlimited access to the world's news. So the next time you feel that you're being pushed or persuaded, or you just want another point of view, check out Ground News with my unique link on screen and in the description below, and you'll get the full picture. And speaking of the news, let's jump right back in. So the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, came under scrutiny about whether or not she was really ever a proper economist. Now, I think I did 1 or 2 videos about these speculations some time ago, and I was going to leave it there because I didn't think there was much more to it. But then apparently she made some changes on the LinkedIn profile. Again, by itself, I might not think anything of it ordinarily, but people tend not to leave this alone. They do want to hear the truth because it's the Chancellor. And not just because of whether or not she really was an economist, when and where she said she was, but whether or not there was any kind of activity to cover that up or mislead the public. All allegations and speculations by others, you understand. But it is getting much more serious. Richard Holden MP has written to the Chancellor and says as follows: "You'll be aware of various reporting over the weekend relating to your employment history. The allegations raised, including that you misrepresented your role at HBOS and then edited your CV after this being discovered, are not trivial matters and leave serious questions. As you know, standards in public life are upheld by rigorous accountability and transparency, which is why I write to you seeking clarity." And I think that's the real key point here. People want clarity as to whether or not she was entirely open and transparent about the contents of her CV and her employment history. This is equally important as many businesses and working people already feel as if Labour has not been honest with them. Whether it be the working people and businesses who believed you would not increase national insurance, the farmers who believed Keir Starmer when he told them that he would protect their way of life, or the pensioners who believed Labour would protect the winter fuel payment. And I would add, from my personal point of view, businesses that are trying to grow in an entrepreneurial and enterprise fashion and are now hit with lots of different taxes and costs that might hinder their progress as a business. Coming from somebody who has run my own businesses for well over 20 years now, right from the ripe age of about 16. My very first earnings, I suppose, I was about 12, but my first real business, I was about 16. Reading on. I would therefore be grateful for a prompt answer to the following questions. Between what years were you employed by the Bank of England? What was your job title at the Bank of England? Because this is the whole thing, whether it was an economist or retail banking or whatever it was she was doing there. Again, as I say, it doesn't really matter what it was she was doing. What matters is whether or not she misrepresented those facts, and people just want the facts. Question 3, between what years were you employed by HBOS? What was your job title at HBOS? What was the reason you left HBOS? Again, we've read things ostensibly and allegedly by ex-colleagues making comments online, which I won't go into here because I don't want to air those allegations when they're unfounded, and leave it to the Chancellor to answer those. Will you now publish a full unedited CV? Now, just on the point of a CV, I remember having a conversation a few years ago about my CV, because I've never been employed by any other company in my life. I've only ever been employed by my own company that I created and therefore generated my own income as such. So I have a rather unique perspective on all this, and I'd like to give you this little unique perspective before we finish this letter off. Because when people look to statutory sick pay or maternity leave or any redundancy pay and these kind of things, if I do not operate my company to the point that it generates profit to pay me, I don't get paid. And so as the owner operator, really, I mean, we employ people, but as the owner operator of the business as such, if I don't work and it doesn't generate profit, I don't get paid, and I get no sick pay and all this sort of stuff as a business owner. That's how we feel. And so when our costs are increased, obviously that has a direct impact upon us as working people, because I do work even though I own the business. So fairly unique perspective there. But the point about the CV is that all I can really say is I've run these businesses for so many years. Now, I did go for interviews for a job many years ago. This was in the middle of really transitioning between one business and another. And one of the questions really insulted me and actually solidified my decision to never work for anybody. And so in between businesses, I was actually applying for a job somewhere to support the business that I was running, to keep someone else employed to do the day-to-day workings of the business, and whilst I went off and got a salary to support that business. The person interviewing me said, "You're obviously not capable of making it work by working for yourself. Why should you work for me?" the guy said. And I thought that was quite an insulting question. So it was at that moment, it was crystallized for me. I would never work for anybody, and therefore have never worked for anybody. And I've always run my own businesses. Anyway, enough talking about myself. You can hear more about that on Black Belt Secrets. Link below. Please go and subscribe there. And if you want to learn more about my business and making money ventures, hit up Daniel Shensmith, my other channel, also linked below. And now let's get back to the letter. So the letter concludes, the allegations that your CV might not be accurate are incredibly serious and would raise significant concerns about your ability to be honest with the British public, concerns which your budget has already raised. I look forward to your reply. And incidentally, so do I. I looked forward to the reply to that. As I said, I was going to leave it, but I think it's really important that we do get answers to those questions. It is important that the British public have confidence in the Chancellor controlling the economy, running the budget, and so on. And it seems that a lot of people don't. Not everybody, obviously. A lot of people probably do have confidence, to be fair and objective about all of this, but a lot of people don't. Let's be honest about it. A lot of people don't have faith in the Chancellor at the moment, from my personal opinion, from what I read online, of course. But we move on. Electric car drivers are now being warned that they are going to be hit with a new kind of car tax, even though taxing electric vehicles surely, logically, goes against their ambitions for net zero in the UK. That would seem to be a bit of a contradiction in terms to me. On the one hand, they are targeting net zero emissions within the UK, and accordingly they're encouraging people to buy electric vehicles so they can accelerate this move towards net zero, and yet now they're going to tax them. So how that's going to work is as follows. There is a new vehicle tax for electric and low emission vehicles from the 1st of April 2025. So how these changes will affect you are as follows. You'll need to pay the lowest first-year rate of vehicle tax, which applies to vehicles with a CO2 emissions of 1 to 50 grams per kilometre. From the second tax payment onwards, those vehicles will pay the standard rate. This is £190 for 2024, but subject to change for 2025, which again is contradictory, because if it's applicable from the 1st of April 2025, then the rate for 2024 is irrelevant unless it's just an idea of what that is. That is, at the moment, £190 for 2024. I'm not an accountant, but I'm sure you can let me know that in the comments if you are. Electric and low emission cars registered between the 1st of April 2017 and the 31st of March 25, you will pay the standard rate. This is £190 for 24 and subject to change for 25. Electric and low emission cars registered between March 2001 and the 31st of March 2017. These vehicles will move to the first band that has a VED value. This is £20 for 24 and subject to change for 2025. Hybrid and alternatively fueled vehicles. The £10 annual discount for hybrids will be removed, and the rate you'll pay depends on when the vehicle was first registered. I'll link this below if I remember. I will endeavour to remember, but I very often forget, so do remind me if I do forget. In other news, the NHS is under fresh scrutiny regarding IVF treatment, in a different way than I've spoken about in the past, but I'll speak more about that in a minute. The new proposals say that trans men, lesbians and single women get immediate access to IVF treatment, whilst they require heterosexual couples to prove 2 years of infertility first. This, being new draft policy, would automatically assume that those groups unable to conceive naturally, therefore granting them instant eligibility to NHS-funded fertility treatment at an estimated cost of £5,000 per cycle. Now, the reason that I spoke about this before, and I think it's somewhat ironic that they seem to be getting it a little bit wrong again in my personal view, is that previously I did an article for Big Issue because I believed it was discriminatory then, and I believe it is now, but in a different way. Then they required same-sex couples wanting to conceive to go through at least 12 privately funded cycles of of artificial insemination before being offered IVF through the NHS, although heterosexual couples were eligible given certain criteria from the outset. And so in that case, I believed it was discriminatory, and in this case, again, I believe it's discriminatory for a different reason, because it will be treating one group less favourably than another based on a protected characteristic, that being sex or potentially sexual orientation. Now, to be fair, this might be justified if it was seen as a proportionate means to achieve a legitimate aim, but obviously it's not without its scrutiny, and some people are going to feel that they are being discriminated against by this new draft policy. And last but certainly not least is the farmers' protest going on today, with Rachel Reeves doubling down and refusing to back down, saying that farmers must pay up for the NHS. Now, she repeats previous claims that there are funding gaps, they need to make difficult decisions, and this inheritance tax raid is part of the plan to plug those gaps, but obviously it's met with fierce criticism. Now, for those that don't understand it, now I don't profess to fully understand it, but very broadly speaking, many of these farmers own large pieces of land which are very high in value, and so if when passing those down to the next generation, they are met with an inheritance tax bill, they have to find money that they don't have in the bank based on the value of the land, bearing in mind it's not cash in the bank. And if they can't find that money, then they have to sell all or part of the land to pay that inheritance tax bill when it comes due. And if they need to sell off the land to do that, then obviously either slices of it or all of it is going to be swallowed up by other buyers, probably corporate buyers, and eventually that will decimate our farming industry. Now, Keir Starmer also stood by the decision and said this will not affect the vast majority of farmers, but obviously many people disagree with that, and that's why there's a protest going on today. Let me know your thoughts and comments about all of this in the comment section below. Please do remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That helps my channel grow. And as always, thank you for watching.